I am in the book of Exodus. I believe we're going to be in Philippians next week. Our two-part series is called Do Hard Things. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, do hard things. Really easy to say and something we avoid doing. Oh, you can stop telling your neighbor, but it was just that one phrase. The title of our sermon is Resistance Training. Resistance Training. The reason that I think I named it this is because these past few months I have gone on a workout journey. I decided that I wanted to get fit. The primary reason was I wanted to fit in some old dresses. And so what I started to do is I joined a gym that had classes, and they used body resistance in order to help you become more fit. And so I started doing that, and I really could see that I was getting more toned. I felt better about myself. And that decision to go to a class and the decision to keep going has been a bit of a domino effect that has started me into, I just got a gym membership. I'm working with a personal trainer who's going to tell me what meals I can eat. I'm on an 1,800 calorie diet. I don't even know how many calories I eat during the day, but I can tell you that I'm really intentional now that I have to write everything down in an app that I got. And I'm trying to figure things out as I journey through becoming healthier. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about resistance training. Resistance training is a form of training that helps build strength. It helps build muscle endurance. And you do that through pushing your body through resistance. I wish that I could do that without the pain of pushing through resistance. And that could mean anything like body weight, gravity, or if you're on one of those higher levels, you're using weights or the machines. The benefits are amazing. I actually looked this up, and there have been several studies that have proven each of these benefits. It boosts your metabolism after about 9 months of training. Constant resistance training can increase your bone density and mass. It improves your mental health by helping to alleviate depression, relieve stress and worry, anxiety, and it also helps you build muscle mass. It improves and strengthens your endurance of muscle, your muscle endurance. And in women in particular, it actually helps to increase self-esteem. In each one of these, there have been studies that have proven from different age groups how this has been beneficial. The study on muscle and bone mass was actually done in people that were 60 years and older. It's beneficial. Resistance training is beneficial to you no matter what age category you are in. And so this domino effect made me feel like I had to do just a little bit more. And all of this because of one decision. Have you ever had one decision that helps you make another good decision and another good decision and another good decision? You're like, well, I'm already here, so I might as well keep going. And in the opposite way, have you ever made one bad decision? And then from there, you made another bad decision, and trying to get out of that circumstance, you make a domino effect of really bad decisions, and you ask yourself, how in the world did I get here? One of the characters, and I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to put that down, pick something up, and then we'll come back. One of the characters that I felt like I related most to in the Bible is someone that I believe lived a life of emotional and spiritual resistance training. I was asked in college, and I don't know if you've ever been asked this question, have you ever thought about a person in the Bible that you really feel like your life has paralleled? A person in the Bible that you really relate to. Well, for me, the answer to that question in college and just throughout life has always been Moses, and particularly Moses at the burning bush. In case some of you guys are familiar with the scripture, with the very last, at the very end of Moses' life, it says that there's never been anyone as amazing as Moses. I don't know that I necessarily identify with that part of Moses as much as I do with the struggle at the burning bush. So I've studied Moses over the years because of this. I've written Old Testament papers and submitted them. I've studied Exodus in Hebrew while on a boat going down the Nile. I'm a bit obsessed. And so today I'm going to share with you some of that obsession. Just a few things that I have learned about the life of Moses. Exodus chapter 3. And I'm going to start in verse 1, how Moses' interactions with God, what they teach us about ourselves in life lessons, and also what they teach us about God. And this is how scripture begins at the burning bush. Now, Moses was keeping the flock of his father Jethro, and he was leading the flock at the certain side over by the Mount of Horeb, which is called the mountain of God. And it says this: the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And I was reading this text, and I was reading it again this morning, and I can't believe that I missed this every single time. I've missed it. This is a foreshadowing to what God is going to do in Moses' life. God is going to light him up, set him on fire, and it's not going to make any sense. But he will not burn up. I don't know if any of you, I'm going to do a lot of pausing. I don't know if any of you have really been through something difficult only to find that somehow you can't really explain why or how, but you made it through. It's like those moments when you know mathematically you owe more money this month than you are bringing in, and yet somehow you have some excess at the end. It's like an assignment that was due, and you didn't really feel like you had done your due diligence, but you stayed up all night and you wrote the best you could, given that you were cramming, and somehow you got an A with marks that said, really insightful work. It's like that person that you just ran into at work, and they are just who you needed to make a project not just good, but excellent. And so as God is somehow giving us things that help build us up, we're also experiencing places where we're burning up, and it doesn't make sense that we are not completely destroyed. That is the first instance where God shows himself to Moses in a bush that is burning up, and by all means should set that entire mountain on fire, but it stays in one localized place and nothing is destroyed. Moses responds with an appropriate, "What in the world?" And God calls Moses, and Moses responds, "I'm over here." And as he begins to move closer to God, this is the one text that reminds us that God was Filipino. God says in verse 5, "Do not come near. Take the sandals off your feet." It was almost as if Moses had completely missed that it is obvious that God, wherever God is, he's home. And whenever you go near to God's home, You take off your sandals because where you are is holy ground. God is about to do something special in Moses' life, and he's inviting him into his very presence, where God dwells, in his dwelling place, into a place where we would call home. God explains that he knows what's been going on in Egypt. He explains to Moses that he's heard the affliction, he's heard the outcry, he's heard the suffering. In verse 10, God says this is the pinnacle point. Why the bush is on fire in the first place is to give Moses this message. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses felt called to do this 40 years ago, and he failed. And now 40 years later, when he's not as fit as he was before, or he doesn't have the position that he had before, when he's not as successful as he was in the past, maybe his body is feeling like it's growing a little bit tired. Now is the time that God decides to come to him. This is when I decided we need to stay here and just talk about the fact that failure is our best teacher. Have you ever asked yourself, or maybe even God, why are you taking so long? Maybe you believe that in your time of prayer or in your time with God, that God has made a promise to you. And in that promise, you believed it at the moment that it was given to you. And it's 10 years later, and you feel like that promise is never going to be fulfilled. Maybe God gave you a promise to have children, and you have this miracle child, but this miracle child is giving you more headache and heartburn than happiness. God, when are you going to deliver me from this child? When are you going to give me the wisdom I need to raise them right? God, they've just had a difficult conversation with me. I don't want to let other people know what's going on in our house. God, did I really ask for this? God, why is this taking so long? I've been dating this particular person, and I feel like they're the one, but we just stay right where we are. And we're not moving to the next step. God, I feel like I've done everything you asked for in my education, and yet I still can't get the job that I went to school for. Come, he says to Moses, 40 years late, and I'll send you to Pharaoh so you can bring your people out of Egypt. Maybe the response to the question of what is taking God so long is that you haven't failed enough. You still think you succeed because you are righteous, because you do things right, the right way. And so when things don't go your way, you get frustrated because you tell yourself and everyone around you, I did everything right. You don't succeed because of how successful you've become. You don't succeed because of how competent you are about the world around you and the particular area that is placed before you. There are people you are looking around that may not be as competent, as successful, as talented as you are, and yet they are surpassing you in ways that you could not understand. God, why are they getting these things, but I'm not? They're not as experienced. They're not as successful. They don't treat people well enough. I work hard on all these things and so that I can become good. And yet God is saying, yes, you are good, but you're good because of me. And when God gives us the gift of success, the gift of talent, the gift of competency, the gift of experience, the gift of success, somehow, for some reason, we fall into that fallacy that's where we tell ourselves that we are the reason we got to where we are. Have you done that before? I know I have. And 40 years ago, Moses did too. And he felt that calling that God had placed in his heart. There is a problem in our society, and this isn't right. People are being treated as if they are invaluable, and yet God has placed on his heart that he is going to be a part of that solution. But Moses was 40 years too early, and now he finds himself successfully tending sheep that don't even belong to him. Poorer than he'd ever been in his life. If you fail enough, you learn that that God is the only reason you can make it through anything. And yes, we do give God our best. Yes, we do decide to get better every chance we have the opportunity. But even more important than gaining every skill is the importance of making sure that you are connected with God. Oftentimes we're told that if we're going to serve in a church or serve in a ministry, the reason for that is because you have this spiritual gift. You have the gift of hospitality. We want you to be able to help us host our potlucks. You have the gift of, oh my goodness, that's the first one that came to my mind. You have this other gift of teaching. We want you to teach a class. You have this gift of, and then we ask you to do things according to the vocal spiritual gifts that you had. You took the test. And now you're asked to do something outside of a space, which is your spiritual gift. And you say, no, I can't do that. I'm not gifted in that area. And that's exactly what's happening with Moses. Moses talks about how he's not gifted enough to do what God has told him. He hasn't had the experience. He doesn't have what it takes. So let's go through this. In chapter 3, verse 11, Moses says this. We're going to jump. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? I'm not good enough, God." And just in case God didn't get the message, he says that the people won't believe that God sent him. He says this in verse 13. And Moses said, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I tell them? I don't even know your name. I don't even know you. I don't think we have a close enough relationship, God. I mean, will they see that I know you? No way. I need to at least have a name to give them. And I don't even have that. Shouldn't I have a name?" In chapter 4, verse 10, Moses says this. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I'm not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. I don't have the skill. This isn't my spiritual gift. I don't have the experience." But it's all summed up in chapter 4, verse 13, where Moses says, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." I failed in the past, and I know it's because I was not enough. I didn't know how to speak. I didn't have the confidence it took. I'm not good enough. They're going to know my past, and they are going to judge me for it. No way. But sometimes the best leaders for God are the ones that are in tune with their failure. When I'm in tune with my failure, when I am in the process of making peace with my failure, when I've made peace with my failure, I'm not as hard on you when you fail. I love it when I'm corrected in a way where people join me in the emotion of what I'm feeling, the not good enough. Where someone has corrected them or corrected us, right? When someone corrects us and then they join you in that emotion of, I know what it's like to not know how to do something and to do it and to completely fail this one time. And then they tell this story. And for me, I laugh and then I cry and I go, yeah. When I'm in tune with all of my failures, I lean on God more. Because it's not my spiritual gift. Have you ever heard that phrase? God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. Because it is more meaningful to God that you are connected with Him and you fail and you fumble in the midst of that connection, just like David did over and over and over again, and yet you fall back into the arms of God and go, I did it again. I messed up. I'm a failure. I didn't get it right. Now everyone's mad at me. I've offended so-and-so. I went up and made a complete fool of myself. Now that kind of resistance training has given you everything you need to do what I told you 40 plus years ago that you were able to do, Moses. You finally failed enough to realize this isn't going to happen because of you. The next lesson that I want to learn, the first one was failure is the best teacher. The second is this: when working with God, you often have to do it scared. I think of the book of Joshua, where God tells him to be courageous. And the reason that he's told to be courageous is because he's really, really scared. And the only difference between fear and courage is how we respond to the emotion. When you are scared, you feel like you just want to hide under a rock, or if you're me, under a blanket, and you just want to pull that blanket over your head and curl up into your bed and just sleep for the next year. Maybe it's that you get stunned and all you want to do is just stop in your tracks and you can't do anything because you're so scared you're going to fail. But if you've failed, sometimes it's okay to lean into your failure. Maybe your response is to run in the opposite direction, or to fight in that very moment. There's no way that you are going to let your fear get the best of you, but you become so aggressive with the emotion in your response to it that you end up hurting other people in the process. Moses was challenged. His thing was he wanted to run away. He tried to reason his way out of it. He tried to reason with God as to how incompetent he was, incapable he was. Have you ever felt that way? Maybe it's just me. And so he starts talking to God about how he can't do this and how he's not capable. And yet it is often when we're working with God that we are asked to do the very thing that scares us. And when we are scared, but we believe that God is going to do something bigger than we can ever understand, and if we trust that God is going to send us into places where we will fail, where we won't be perfect, and nevertheless, we are going to do amazing things, not because of what we are capable of, but because God is capable of so much more. So in between all of these verses that I've read to you, I've left out some really important stuff. And if you go back and you read it yourself, it's really God's plan on how this is going to work. And the only thing that God asks of Moses is to be his mouthpiece to Pharaoh. He says, Moses' heart or Pharaoh's heart is going to get hard, and it is only with a mighty hand that he will let them go. And he tells them that he's going to fail, that he's going to approach Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is going to say no. He says all of these things. He tells them that at some point they will finally plunder the Egyptians at the end of chapter 3, and they're going to come out with so much wealth. But then he goes on and continues to tell and encourage Moses. I'm the father of your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Do you remember the stories of the things that we did, of the places that we traveled, of the people that we saved, of the miracles that happened? This is the God that is asking you to do the same thing, Moses. Oh God, I can't. I'm not good enough. I love that God uses people with low self-esteem. At my worst, I am just like Moses in this place of his life. I'm asked to do things and I say, God, I'm not good enough. And oftentimes I fail, and it's really, really embarrassing because I have such a loud personality. I hardly do anything quietly. So I fail loudly. Have you ever done that? Why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this today and next week? Because I really believe that sometimes we wait for things to be perfect before we move forward. And sometimes I believe that we want the perfect scenario to come, and if we can't really control the outcome, then we don't do anything. But this week and next week, I want to challenge us to look at Scripture and look at the hardest places of Scripture and stay there. There is no logical reason why Moses should have listened to God. And we focus on all the great things he did, right? Carried people across, just holding up his hands and the staff that God gave him as a switch, as a key to unlock the door of the seas, to part the waters. The victories that they had along the way, the miracles of turning bitter water sweet, of manna that came and fell down, all while Moses was leading, the miracle of him seeing God face to face, and all the failures that came with it, all the resistance that came with it, like his sister Miriam, how she was really wanting maybe to have more access to Moses, and so she would gather people together and make fun of his wife Zipporah because her skin was so dark and Miriam was so light. God finally allows his presence to come over Miriam, and when the presence of God, that cloud is lifted up, Miriam has leprosy. Her skin has become so white that she's dying. And yet, in the midst of his own sister disrespecting his wife in that way, it would make sense, wouldn't it, that he would leave her? You know what? If that's who you're going to be, if that's who you're going to be when you're around me, you are really contrary to the gospel work. But instead, after all of this resistance, all the way through, instead he says, no, God, we can't leave her. And they camped in that very spot until God answered the prayer of removing leprosy from Miriam for disrespecting Moses' wife because of her race. And then there's that time where he comes and he tells the elders, and the elders are so excited when he first gets there. The Lord has heard our prayer. But the moment that Moses goes and talks to Pharaoh, Pharaoh responds by saying, these people are lazy. I want you to take away all of their straw. Tell them to collect their own straw, but they still have to make the same amount of bricks. And if they don't, you beat them. The community suffered so much harm because of what Moses did. By speaking, right? He didn't break any laws. He didn't go up there and disrespect him. He didn't speak poorly. He wasn't violent towards Pharaoh. He simply went and spoke, and people were so upset that the outlash was painful to the community, so painful that the community wanted him to leave. We'd rather things be the way they were than have things get worse because you say God is coming here. Sometimes God even causes resistance in the midst of the prayer, and you begin to wonder, just like Moses did, and ask God, why did you really send me here? But our last lesson is this. It's never about you. It never was. It never will be. If God wanted things to be perfect, God would do it himself. But this whole story of Moses is not about Moses. The story of the burning bush is not about Moses. The story of Moses' failures is not about Moses. It's always about who God is and how God explained to Moses here. And I love how it's written out. God doesn't always write it out. I love how it's written out in chapters 3 and 4 in the book of Exodus. And God says, I am going to send you into a place where you will receive resistance. And as we start to close and Dan makes his way up to the piano, I want to remind you that just because you are in a place where your life feels like you are experiencing a lot of resistance, I do not want you to equate that with God abandoning you, with God not wanting you to be there, with you having made a bad decision. Contrary to that belief, if we look at what is going on in the book of Exodus, it is emotional, spiritual resistance. It is failure that helps us to build the muscle, build the bone density, build the endurance, lose that extra weight, get emotionally healthy. It is the resistance that is helping us to get to a place where we can deal with not a good life, but more difficulties in a healthier way. And it is never about me. It is always a lesson about God and how God is in his interactions with me. And when other people that I'm not even aware of because I'm so stuck in my situation, when other people watch you and me deal with our resistance in better ways and better ways every time we come across it, we are going to inspire them without even meaning to. And so I hope we can be encouraged, not because Moses did good, but because God was good when Moses thought God wasn't. When God allowed Moses to fail so he could learn a lesson. When God encouraged him to work through it even though he was scared. And then when we remember that it is never about us and always about God. May you be encouraged. May God use you when you're scared, in the midst of your failure. And may you change the world because you are faithful to God when it doesn't make sense.